All right, part two of the interview with Gabriel Cidman.
Yes.
We have got you in part one. You got as far as the ICU.
ICU.
Okay,
Yes.
so now you've got a mask on.
Well, now, yeah, I got I think they called it a nasal something, but it's just the breathing hose through the nose.
Uh-huh.
And I had that, and I had max 6 units of oxygen, and I had the full one that covers your nose and your mouth that gives you 15 units of oxygen, and yet that wasn't enough to keep me out of the ICU.
Okay. So.
And I remember, and I tell my wife is, it's funny how things kind of come back to me now. But I was telling my wife the other day how I remember distinctly when because the bed went with me. So they pushed me out from the main or the general area of the hospital to ICU. And I remember people's faces and again, part of it just could be part of my own imagination, but people definitely knew, where I was going. And you can see people's faces were like, oh man.
I mean,
That's not good.
You believe at the time you could perceive that they were thinking about getting you some flowers or something? I mean, like
yeah, like
might
saying,
not see
oh,
this
man,
guy again, kind of thing.
Yeah, it just the ICU.
Uh-huh.
Again, the ICU it's great doctors and great nurses, but it just with this whole COVID thing, everyone knows what it means. It means you're very sick. You're not going to leave the hospital anytime soon. There's a reason why you're going to the ICU.
Yeah.
So it just wasn't a pleasant feeling being pushed out and kind of have everyone kind of staring at you. Again,
Right.
The best way I can describe it is just like a death march. Because now I was definitely leaving, going to that step where you don't want to go. And even in the ICU, when they wheeled me in, they kind of said again, we don't want to get to the ventilator. We want you to get better here. And the one, go ahead.
So there are finer points for somebody that hasn't been through it. So there's the ICU, and that's not good, but you're still not intubated, or are you at that point?
No. The
and
ICU,
you're not on
the
a
ICU
ventilator.
is just, yeah. The ICU, the best way to describe it is, so before I was in a hospital room, right? Just like a regular room, like we've all, if you've been in a hospital, you've been in a hospital room. But the ICU, it's like a fishbowl. It's like an all white room. It's very sterile, and there's no wall. It's a glass door that slides, and then basically every doctor, every nurse can see you, which that's the point. You're being monitored more carefully, and there it's even more PPE and even more care with patients, because obviously if you're there because you're very, very sick. And I remember the one thing they say, and there it's more like direct and to the point. Like everyone is there on a mission to get people out of there as soon as possible. And I think it was a nurse or a doctor who told me, you need to get on your stomach and lie on your stomach for 16 hours. And they had tried to do that with me before the ICU, but I had I had a lot of cables and wires on my chest monitoring my vitals. But then I had this little contraption. It kind of looked like those old transistor radios, and that's where everything got hooked into. And I had that in this little pocket in the gown. So lying on my stomach isn't easy to begin with, but then I got all these contraptions on my chest and this thing. So I wasn't able to do that great before the ICU. In the ICU, they said that you have to do this. You have to be on your stomach for 16 hours.
What's the reason?
That was super uncomfortable.
What's the reason that you have to be on your stomach?
So the way they explain it to me, your lungs, obviously if you're on your back, your lungs are, I guess, towards the back of your body. And if you're lying down, you're putting pressure on your lungs. At that point, they want to open up your lungs. And I guess there's fluids I forgot what they call it, but in your lungs, we have these little pockets. And that's where the oxygen flows in and oxygenates your blood and keeps you alive.
Is it possible the word is alveoli?
That's
the only word I know from biology, so I had to give it a shot. Okay.
So I guess in my case, they have fluid in them. So what they wanted me to do was to be on my stomach, and that opens up your lungs and gives your lungs, I guess, more capacity to breathe. And they wanted me to cough because, like, when you're coughing like that, it kind of hurts your throat. They're like, no, cough. You gotta cough. You gotta cough. You gotta cough. So I'm on my stomach. coughing my guts out, because when they told me, you have to cough to get out of here, you have to, do this and be on your stomach. And the nurses were amazing. I had like, 2 or 3 nurses putting pillows all around me to try to make me feel as comfortable as possible, moving my arms in certain ways. So I kept some kind of movement in my limbs, but also keeping me on my stomach for 16 hours. And again, that goes back to the analogy of the death march. Every hour that it passed that I was still lying there, I knew I was getting closer to the ventilator.
Okay, so
Eventually,
you went in on Sunday afternoon, and now you're talking about what, Tuesday, or is it later than Tuesday?
no, later than Tuesday. It's here I have a calendar. I should have asked my wife for a little more clarity on the dates, but it had to be towards the end of that week.
Oh, okay.
I think it might have been the 18th that I might have been on the ventilator, because I think I was still texting with you most of that week, right, when I was in the hospital.
Well, I don't know when it was. I can look it up. I still have it,
Yeah.
and this is stuff on Facebook. And we didn't have a lot of communication, but when I saw you were active on Facebook, the green dot by your name, you and I were in touch, not many times, but you said something like, "I've got stories." I remember you texted something like, "I could tell you stories." And I have the sense you weren't about to tell me, but there are plenty of stories. And that could mean almost anything, but it sounds like it would be something scary.
Yes.
The stories, they weren't like, I have a good view or anything like that.
Well, yeah. And at that point, like, again, the whole thing was scary, but once I was in the ICU, the fear really went into overdrive, because then it was real. Then I knew, the ventilator was probably next to me, for me, again, because I'd never seen a ventilator.
Yeah.
Because usually you're knocked out when you see one. I was like, I'm in the room, I'm in the ICU room, there's doctors here that look worried. Like, this is, the fear was super real. I was,
So the fear is
very
that
anxious.
you're going to take the next step, and that's really a death march. That the odds
that
just
I'm gonna die.
through the roof.
That I'm gonna die.
You do that, yeah.
Yes. And again, you start going through all, your family, are they going to be okay? Like, every single thing goes through your head.
Right.
And it's another way to describe it, just absolute fear. And again, a lot of us, I've been in car accidents. There's nothing like it. Like, to be facing death, knowing that could be it. Knowing, that once they put you on, because again, that you are being knocked out.
Sure.
And you don't know if you're gonna wake up again. That's a very
this
real fear.
This might be the last thing you think about. The last is fear. And
so I was willing to. I told the doctor, I'll stay on my stomach for 40 hours if you need me to, but
40 hours.
So they said 16 hours. We want you on your stomach, and this is the, I guess, there's a lot of God moments. I'm a big believer in a higher power and God and all that. So to me, this doctor, his name was Dr. I just talked to the guy. Oh, shit, I forgot his name already. But this doctor came in and said, "Listen, you're not getting better." And this is towards the end of the 16 hours. I don't remember if I did 16 hours or pretty close to the end of 16 hours. He came in and he said, Dr. McLeod, that's his name, Dr. McLeod. And he said, "You're not getting better. We're going to have to put you on a ventilator." And at that point, I almost didn't hear what he said, the rest of it. But in essence, he told me that there was a drug that he had been approved for, or that he had access to, that they've had pretty good success with, and that I would have to give authorization. And the way I remember it, he told me, we've given it to patients once they were on a ventilator and very sick to help them recover. We haven't been able to give to someone, or we haven't gotten authorization from a patient prior to going under. We'd like you to do that. And to be honest, Jerry, at that point, I'm on my stomach, gasping for my life, trying to just, not die. And a guy saying, "We have something that can help you." I wasn't going to say, "Let's have a discussion and let me call a lawyer or a second opinion and review this medicine." I was like, and I literally said, "Doctor, you have my life in your hands. I trust you. I'll sign it." And when I talked to him about maybe a week ago, and he explained to me that I was very lucky in the fact that he had worked for 4 weeks prior to get approval from this company. And the drug was, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this, remdesivir, I think it's called, or pronounced, remdesivir. So it wasn't, at that point, it was an experimental drug, and this company was still testing. So this doctor took 4 weeks to get approval, and he had to do all this paperwork and all these authorizations, I guess, to get approved to be able to administer the drug.
Yeah.
And so when I came into the hospital, he had just gotten that approval. And then even then, he still had to present me to the company to say, I want to use it on this patient. These are his vitals. This is how sick he is. This is his blood, and send all this stuff. And they approved me. And at that point, there were only 16 people in the country that were given this drug during this trial run. I was patient number 5. So this is from what talking to him.
Yeah.
And there was one nurse who was pregnant who didn't want to be close to COVID patients. So he asked her to be the point person to send the company, I guess, real-time information of my condition, of all my vitals, all my blood work, because they were, I guess, monitoring every person that was getting this drug to make sure, I guess, that it was working, and just for their own data, and make sure it wasn't killing me.
Yeah.
So I was kind of, all the stars aligned in my favor that I got this drug. And at that point, it was called an experimental drug, not FDA approved. Once, I think towards the end of my stay there, they got what's called an emergency approval from the FDA, which still isn't an FDA stamp, but you can use it. We think it works, but we're not sure. I think now, as we saw in the press last week, now it is available to hospitals, and now it is FDA approved, but it is very costly. When I got it, it was actually free because I was in the experimental phase of the drug.
So you're on your stomach. It's not working. They're going to put you on a ventilator. You signed over permission for them to use this experimental drug. And in what sense were you first? You said you were 5th on the list or something,
Well, yeah,
but you
I
were
was
the first to give permission while you were still coherent?
Awake. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how soon after that are you going on the ventilator? Right away?
It was pretty soon after that. Yeah. Once I signed it, they started prepping me for that. And the one, again, the next God moment that I had, at this point, I think I was shaking with fear. At this point, I was pretty upset. And this nurse comes over, and I guess she was called the Zoom nurse. She would do Zoom calls with families, with patients, because remember, there's no contact with any family.
Right.
And she said, do you want to Zoom with your family? And I said, no. I said, I don't want this to be their last, which again, I was still very, very, in my mind was, this could be it. So I said, I don't want this to be their last memory of me, lying on my stomach, crying my eyes out. I don't want them to have that lasting memory for the rest of their lives. And she goes, do you want to pray instead? And I go, yes. And she prayed with me. And that was one of those touching, and I tell people, the nurses are just so amazing, because to me, that wasn't an act of a nurse. That was an act of a human being. Because it had nothing to do with my vitals or medicine or my well-being. It was my mental well-being. She just saw someone who was, terrified, fearful for their life. And she, said, do you want to pray? That's amazing. To me, that's not something that I'm sure no nursing school class says, pray with your patients. That was just an amazing person. And I can't wait for the day where I meet her and hug her and thank her, because that meant so much. That was a special moment. And in a sea of horrendous experiences, that was a pretty nice moment to have.
I
right
can't
before
imagine
going under.
I can't imagine the amount of stress that they have to deal with all the time. And I don't know what their hours are, but even normal, quote, normal hours would be terribly difficult.
Well, it's crazy hours. They come in at 7 a.m. and work till 3, and some come in at 3 and leave at 2 a.m. It's just they're just amazing people.
Yeah,
they really are tremendous people, and that took care of me.
Okay.
So that's kind of where everything, like in The Sopranos, where everything went dark for me.
Yeah.
At that point, because I was knocked out.
So while you're on the ventilator, you're knocked out. You're not conscious.
Yes.
And that's just the way it is. Is it because it would be such an unpleasant experience, or what?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned an article from the New York Times.
Yeah, it was in the New York Times Magazine last week, I think, or at the end of June.
I think. So I think I read that or something similar, where there's a thing called hospital delirium, right? And that kind of leads to hallucinations. They try sometimes to not give a patient that much drug when on a ventilator. But if the patient struggles and it's not recovering, at that point they got to make a decision. Do we, keep him on less drug and risk him not getting better, or knock him out completely and risk the delirium and the hallucinations?
Okay.
In my case, I was so sick, they that wasn't even a question. They had to knock me out because I breathe on my own at all. I had a machine breathe for me, so I had to be knocked out completely.
Okay, so, but wait a minute. If you're unconscious, are you having nightmares, hallucinations? You are.
I'm pretty see, and that's where it gets tricky in my mind with these hospital deliriums. A lot of them were, I think, when I was knocked out, because my wife says that the doctors would tell them that, last night he was very uneasy, his heart rate was very high, his blood pressure was extremely high, so we're working to get that down. Or last night he was okay, he wasn't as full of anxiety. So they could see, based on my vitals, that I would be going through these episodes. So the only conclusion I have is that I was going through some of these hallucinations while I was under.
But I mean, are these things that you remember now?
A lot of them, yes. A lot of them, unfortunately, yes. A lot of them, unfortunately. And I think the distinction, I think now that I've been able to kind of analyze these hallucinations, whenever I was hallucinating that I was walking, I think I was in a coma, in the drug-induced coma. When I was struggling to move, I was awake, because that was more my reality. When I was awake, I couldn't move that much because of how much muscle I had lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the distinction that I have in my mind of when the hallucinations were happening. But definitely they were happening throughout my ventilator stay.
And so, from what you remember, are they terrifying things? Are they
All
just
of them, every
weird?
single one was fear-based, anxiety. I'll give you some examples. Like, some are, and again, some were very involved, where it feels like they were days or weeks long, where I literally built a whole scenario. I built a different ICU. I had different nurses and doctors, and most of them were conspiring against me. And again, it depends on how long you want to go with this video. Some were very involved, hallucinations, and some were just very short. And some of them now are, I guess, kind of comical. Like one I shared with you before in your garage was Derek Jeter passing away from COVID. And in my mind, Derek Jeter passed away from COVID.
Sorry, Derek. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
To all the Yankee fans out there, I apologize. But Derek passed away. And in my mind, obviously, New York was in mourning, and they were going to have this big memorial for Derek on down Fifth Avenue. And I remember the funny part was my kids saying, "Oh, we want to go to it." I was like, "You can go, but be careful. You got to wear masks. Be careful." And they're like, "Dad, come with us." And I said, "I can't, be seen at the parade. And my boss sees me. I'm supposed to be in the hospital. They see me at the parade on TV. They're gonna say, well, you should be at work, not at the parade." So this is all real. This is happening in my mind. And I distinctly remember that the night before, I was in the hospital, and I could hear all the preparations and people already lining up and hooting and hollering, getting ready for the big Derek Jeter memorial the next day. And another funny part was, I remember the newspapers kept running all these pictures of Derek, and some of them were pictures that I had taken, because I basically grew up with Derek Jeter. Like, we're almost the same age. And I was, back in the old days, I would go to 30, 40 Yankee games when Derek
Even
was.
though you're a Mets fan, right?
Yeah. But my cousin Nancy had season tickets to the old Yankee Stadium, so she would give me tickets all the time.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up with Derek, and I have all these pictures of Derek in all these different games, and they were appearing in these papers. And I was getting upset, like, wait, I'm getting no photo credit for all my images. But
so wait a minute. So this is not the most terrifying hallucination I ever heard of.
This is
Although
one of the
if
more
you're a
comical
Derek
ones.
Jeter fan, you got to feel a little bad about it. But okay.
Yeah, and then with a weird twist, right? at the end of the memorial, and they had like a red carpet thing, and A-Rod was there, and his teammates were there. His wife and his daughters were the last ones on the red carpet, and this is where it gets a little creepy and weird. And part of some of my page 6 fandom trying to post comes into play. That evening, there was a rumor that Derek Jeter's wife was cheating on Derek before he passed away, and the New York press had investigated, and it found out that it was a young Hispanic player from Panama or something who was having an affair, and Derek found out about it while he was still alive, and he had something saying that she could keep whatever money she had already, but he didn't want the guy to live in the big mansion in Tampa. They didn't want him to touch his kids' money. So all this big drama, and then the New York press was attacking her and killing her for being, cheating on the captain.
Okay, let me ask: was this one skit or piece of drama that occurred once to you?
Yes,
because
once.
I will say I've had dreams, and it seems to me I've had them several times. I wasn't in a ventilator, and I wasn't ill. But I've had dreams that I think I've had many times, and they sunk in as part. I think I told you this when you were telling me about the Derek Jeter thing. Over the years, there have been dreams I had that became part of my sense of the world. Like this really happened. It didn't. But these for you, these were one-time occurrences.
Yes. Yeah, I've never had a dream about Derek dying. I've never wished Derek died.
Yeah.
So but the crazy part is, so I had the hallucination, and I moved on, had other hallucinations. When I was in the hospital, and I was this towards the end of my stay there, and I was realizing that a lot of these things I had were hallucinations. The Derek one in my mind still happened. I still hadn't cleared that one through my mind. And I was talking to a doctor, and I said, yeah, it's kind of messed up how Derek also passed away from this. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, Derek Jeter passed me. He's like, I don't think so. I was like, yeah, he and I was like, yeah, no, doc, he passed away.
He pushes you away and goes running down the hall.
And he Googled it. He goes, no, Derek's still alive. And I was like, oh man, like, so in my mind, it was so real. Even after I knew I had hallucinations, that was so real in my head that I thought it had still happened. That's how real it was.
Do you think that one stuck longer than the others because it wasn't entirely bizarre? It was mostly things that could happen. I don't know whether the others were phantasmagorical, like monster movies.
Well, they was again. I'm a big Howard Stern fan, and I'm a big Howard Stern fan. And I'm also a big Narcos fan, the show on Netflix. And somehow I mixed those two worlds that I like, and I had a hallucination where Howard was producing a movie in Mexico that was about narcos, and one of his show writers, was trying to steal the limelight and be the star. But a lot of it was very scary because a lot of the stuff that was going on in the movie was so realistic. And then at the same time that I was there, like somehow I was like above this world watching Howard produce this movie and all the scenes and all this stuff. And some of it was kind of comical, but then it morphed into this really dark area where while we were in Mexico, we were here, but part of me was in Mexico overseeing this. Again, this is where it gets a little disjointed now in my mind. But the point is, I have nieces in Mexico still. And one of my nieces was calling my daughter, Anna, to get money because she says that there was a kid she was babysitting that was kidnapped, and they were asking for $5,000 or something to release the kid, or they were going to kill the kid within 3 hours. And I was telling my daughter, don't get involved. We don't know if this is true. And again, all this fear.